Welcome to Inclusive and Equitable Teaching, a conversation on one of UW's new core elements of effective teaching. My name is Katie Malcolm. I am the Associate Director of the UW Center for Teaching and Learning and an Affiliate Assistant Professor of English on the Seattle campus. And I'm also a member of the Teaching at UW Network, which is a tri-campus collaboration focused on advancing reflective, inclusive, evidence-based teaching and fostering community among instructors and instructional staff across UW's 3 campuses. Today's session is part of a series of events that Teaching at UW is hosting this year to help broaden and deepen understanding of the new core elements of effective teaching, which the UW faculty voted to adopt into the faculty code last spring. And many of you are aware of and or already practice these elements in your teaching, but I wanted to take a few moments to introduce and review them before we get to our wonderful faculty panelists and dive into our focus on the element for today. I'm going to share my screen here. Is everyone seeing my screen okay, Nathan? Yeah, okay, great. So as you can see here on our Teaching at UW page, this is just an introduction to the core elements. If you want to see them in all of their glory in the faculty code, you can click on this link to section 24 through 32. But otherwise, you can see our 5 core elements here on this page. These elements are backed by decades of research and are already practiced, again, by many of you. They are not a comprehensive list of all effective teaching practices, but they are core to any effective teaching practice, regardless of your discipline, your teaching context, or the campus that you teach on. And these elements emerged from an effort that took actually over 2 years by the Faculty Senate Councils and the Future of Teaching and Learning Initiative. These involved deep consultation with hundreds of faculty and academic professionals at the UW and at peer institutions across the US. So over the course of the academic year, Teaching at UW will host 5 sessions, each focused on one of the core elements. And today's session is going to focus on the second element, on inclusive and equitable teaching. And this element reads, inclusive and equitable, effective teaching considers learners' experiences and creates opportunities for each learner to thrive. And decades of research have clearly shown that when students are in a class environment that feels welcoming and where they believe that they can succeed, they are more likely to learn and succeed, regardless of the topic or the course content. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. At the end of the session, I'll share with you some of our Teaching at UW resources on inclusive and equitable teaching. Yeah, but for now, let's get started with our panel. So I'm so thrilled today to be joined by 2 fabulous panelists. Tyler Fox is a teaching professor in human-centered design and engineering on the Seattle campus. And Nathan E. Lee is an assistant teaching professor in the School of Educational Studies on the Bothell campus. So this is going to be a panel conversation where we'll start with our panelists sharing some insights on how they incorporate the element of inclusive and equitable teaching into their own practice. Now I will at last turn it over to our panelists. So our first question for Nathan and Tyler, which I'm also going to put here in chat for you all, is can you talk about how you create and foster inclusive and equitable classes? And I'll turn it over first to Tyler.
Thanks, Katie. It's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to talk about specifically a practice I do that I call negotiated grading. It's an alternative form of grading. But before I do that, I want to give a quick plug because I was reflecting on some feedback I got about a class recently, and especially for larger classes, I always kick off class with some music. and someone commented on it about it, kind of set a nice tone. So I'm sharing a link here from a colleague at Dartmouth, Eugene Korsunski, excuse me, where he has Joy cards, and it's a crowdsourced um, resource on creating joy in your classroom. So I'll just sort of leave it there. I'll also give Eugene a plug. He's looking for people to submit ideas for Joy Cards Part 2. So if you have your own way of creating joy in your classroom, I encourage you to share that with instructors around the country, really. Um, Mine is music. That's how I started. And it started not for students, but for me. And I kind of hold to that today. It sets the tone for me to step into class and do what I need to do. But I'm going to talk about how I do negotiated grading in our master's courses. Just for some reference, our master's courses are it's a MS in Human-Centered Design and Engineering. It's professionally oriented, and our students come from all backgrounds. We have probably a third STEM, a third arts and humanities, and a third social sciences. Many of them are coming straight from undergrad, and many of them are already working in industry. So I refer to it as the one-room schoolhouse. And this is how I started doing this negotiated grading, because grading someone who's a professional designer and has been for 3 to 5 years, alongside of someone who maybe is taking their first design course, super challenging for all of us. And so I've shifted my emphasis to really getting students to think about what they've learned in class in relation to our learning objectives. And so here's what I do. I do a big sell at the beginning that they're not getting graded on their assignments. All assignments are complete and complete, and I give them lots of feedback. And then throughout the course, I have them do weekly reflections. I'll use my service design course because I think that's where I've done the most work here. In service design, we're learning to cultivate a holistic understanding of a large scale service oriented delivery. So not a product oriented, like you might think of like a phone but like a service, which might be a government service, it could be an education service, or of course, Spotify, Netflix, all these things are also services, right? And so most weeks I ask students to reflect on their lived experiences of so how they use and experience services in relation to the course materials, our readings, our in-class activities, what they're doing on their projects. Um, and within that, I also ask them very specific reflective assignments on what they're learning. So we might do 2 or 3 weeks of just normal reflection, and then in week 3, 6, and often in week 9, very specific reflections about the course learning objectives and what they're doing. And this leads up to our final meeting where I have first they fill out a survey. They tell me they rate their growth in relation to learning objectives. And I have a few other questions, and one that's really important is asking them to think about what they may have learned that's not in the learning objectives. So this might be software, and they might have had a particularly challenging group activity that they learned from, some of the activities we did in class, um, and anything. And basically, I encourage them that that's valid learning, right? That's we're all sort of on a different journey. And then I have one-on-one Zoom meetings with the students where we talk about what they learned. I get to ask them some questions. Sometimes the questions are easy, sometimes the questions are a little hard. I might take the opportunity to do a little stress testing for someone who's like maybe super quiet throughout the quarter. It's a great opportunity, and I'm usually pleasantly surprised where students really show what they picked up in class. And then we agree upon a final grade. I have some firm requirements. Like if you want a 4.0, you have to do everything that is required. It's a pretty low bar, I argue. But I really push students. And then there are opportunities for me to maybe increase a grade. Sometimes students undervalue the work that they've done, and it's a good time for me to step in and talk them up a little bit. But that's about it. That's my negotiated grading. There are other things I do for inclusive and equitable teaching, but I wanted to just focus on this, and I'll stop talking so we can hear from Nathan E. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Tyler. Nathan.
Thanks, Tyler. And thanks everyone for being here. It's great to be in this space with all of you. So I come from the background of being an elementary school teacher. And so I bring into my classroom a lot of those experiences around the use of different strategies. I'm in the School of Educational Studies at Bothell. And so a lot of our students are undergraduates who are looking to get their teaching certificate or are looking to serve their communities. One thing I love about working at UW-Bothell is that we have such a diverse student population, and I love that a lot of my students look like me. And so one thing that's really important for me is building relationships with my students. And one of the classes that I teach focuses on theories of learning, culture, and identity. And we are getting a lot more students that are not just focused on education, but I'll have computer science students, political science students from a range of majors, but everyone has the experience of wanting to be a learner. I take a sociocultural stance on the way that I teach. And so I tell students that we use cultural artifacts to mediate the way that we learn. And so on the first day of class, prior to class, I send out an email and I say, hey, everyone, bring some kind of artifact that represents you and your identity and maybe how you learn. So we go around and we share what those artifacts are as a way to build community. Um, and so for me, I share artifacts from my identity as a Chinese American, things passed down from my family that really impact the way that I look at the world, the way that I walk through the world, and the way that I look at learning, and how I see myself as a learner. And so that's one way that I really try to get to know my students. Um, Another class that I teach is human growth and learning, so focuses a lot on child development, adolescent development. And with my background in project-based learning curriculum, I give students an opportunity to kind of critique something that's going on in society or some of their experiences growing up. And one of the things that I do is give them an opportunity to design a summer camp. Um, that's connected to them, their identity. And we know that summer camps are very expensive. Some of my students have never experienced a summer camp because of how much they cost, or they never saw a summer camp that spoke to who they are as an individual. So I try to give them a lot of agency to think about their own lived experiences and tying it to the content that they're learning in class. So they have to design a camp, and the activities have to be tied to what they're learning about child and human development. And so I've had students come up with some amazing camp designs. I've had a Muslim student come up with a camp design for Muslim girls, but it was focused on wrestling. And so that was really fascinating to me. Another student focused on designing a camp for children from, or refugee children, so that they can process and talk about their experiences as refugees and focus on healing and joy in their communities. So I love that my students have been able to connect the content to something that really speaks to who they are as individuals and really focusing on their identities. Um, and then I give them opportunities to also give feedback on the project and what they would change. That's feedback for me. Um, and and I also have them share, a bit of their reflection and learning from their projects. So that's just how I really incorporate their identities, focusing on including their identities as assets, yeah, so I know that in different fields this might look different as you think about projects tied to your field. But yeah.
Thank you, Nathan and Tyler. I heard you both really talking about being very intentional about the way that you build relationships with students and foster those relationships through one-on-ones or through projects that allow them to bring in their lived experiences. But now I want to move on to our second question. So because this element is part of the faculty code, we have had a number of UW faculty asking how they might demonstrate this element in their teaching. And so our second question for you, which I will also put in the chat here, is how have you demonstrated or do you plan to demonstrate this element of teaching in an annual evaluation or promotion tenure scenario? And this time, let's start with Nathanie.
Sure. Yeah, so I just submitted all my promotion materials this past year, so fingers crossed. So, the Class A legislation had just passed, and so I was like, oh, this is a good time to work in these core elements in my narrative. And so I wrote my narrative kind of according to these themes, these five core elements. And of course, to avoid making them too long, I put some of them together. But I tied my data and my student work and my evidence to each of these themes so that folks who would be reading them would understand these clear connections to how I was thinking about and assessing my own teaching. Um, so some of the things I included were data from evaluations, student work, student project reflections, and so forth.
Thank you, Nathanie. Tyler.
Yeah, well, I was promoted last year, so I didn't have to go through these same steps. But my approach was very similar to what Nathanie just discussed. I remember I did talk explicitly about inclusion in my teaching portfolio and in my statement about sort of finding a broader network of people in this industry to speak to my classes. So I have to record interviews. So that was kind of so I have the same advice. But what I will share is something that we've done in our department, and I'll just share my screen so we can look at it, that I was a part of creating last year, which is a new peer evaluation form. And when setting it up, we explicitly included the 5 dimensions of teaching in our form. And the first thing we started do it off with is an evaluee reflection. So the person who's being evaluated can reflect on the 5 dimensions of teaching. I've shared this with the CTL so they can share it with you all. I'll leave that up for just a second so you kind of get an idea of the flow. And one of the things that I was reflecting on is that actually in my peer evaluations that had happened, was I've rarely had to go back and look at those to help me write my narrative, which I wanted to sort of reverse that. So I wanted to really make something that someone could look back to and think about what have I done in these areas and how does it relate to my teaching and how do I develop my own personal narrative. So I kind of started with the fact that I didn't feel like I had that resource to help me write that narrative and start thinking about how do we kind of lay the groundwork for junior faculty to start talking about that.
Again, I want to give a huge thank you to Nathanie and Tyler. Thanks, everyone.